heliconia and the anthurium lily. The floron or end of the mace is in the shape of a cocoa pod. This mace is gold in color. Used as a weapon in ancient times to protect the king, today the presence of the mace in the chamber symbolizes the authority vested in the houses on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This has been a presentation of the Parliament Channel and Parliament Radio 105.5 FM.
Deputy Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this House here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Deputy Speaker.
Honorable members, I have received communication from Mr. Fazal Karim, MP, member for Chaguanas East, who has requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the member seeks is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate, the Firearms Amendment Bill 2019, in the name of the Attorney General.
Attorney General.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 64-1B, I beg to move that the next stage of the Firearms Amendment Bill 2019 be taken later in the proceedings.
Honorable members, the question is that the next stage of the Firearms Amendment Bill 2019 be taken later in the proceedings. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Minister of Finance. Hold on, Mr. Finance.
Petitions, papers.
No, Minister of Finance.
your pleasure, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Papers 1 to 2, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Agricultural Development Bank of Trinidad and Tobago for the years ended September 30th, 2016 and 2017. 3, the audited financial statements of East Port of Spain Development Company Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2013. 4, the annual audited financial statements of Clico Investment Fund for the financial year ended December 31st, 2018. The consolidated audited financial statements of the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial year ended December 31st, 2018. 6 to 11, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Environmental Management Authority, Environmental Trust Fund for the years ended September 30th, 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. 12, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Fair Trading Commission for the year ended September 30th, 2018. 13 to 16, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the National Agricultural Marketing and Development Corporation for the years ended September 30th, 2012, 13, 14, and 15. 17 to 18, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the National Institute of Higher Education, Research, Science, and Technology for the years ended December 31st, 2012 and 2013. 19 to 20, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Public Transport Service Corporation for the years ended September 30th, 2013 and 14. 21, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Regulated Industries Commission for the year ended December 31st, 2015. 22, the annual report and consolidated financial statements of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago for the year ended September 30th, 2018. 23 to 24, the administrative report and audited financial statements of the Betting Levy Board for the periods July 1st, 2016 to June 30th, 2017, and July 1st, 2017 to June 30th, 2018. 25, the report of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago on insurance and pensions for the year ended December 31st, 2017. 26, the annual report of the Taurus Services Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2018. 27, the annual administrative report of the Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center Management Company Limited for the year ended September 30th, 2018. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that papers 1 to 5 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee and papers 6 to 24 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers 1 to 5 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee and papers 6 to 24 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 28, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Finance to the 17th report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee on the examination of the audited accounts, balance sheet, and other financial statements of the Export Centers Company Limited for the financial years 2008 to 2011. Paper 29, the response of the Office of Procurement Regulation to the 6th report of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs on an inquiry into the implementation of the new public procurement system. Paper number 30, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Finance to the 18th report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of Caroni 1975 Limited for the years ended June 30th, 2010 to 2018. Papers 31 and 34, the responses of the 19th report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Cocoa Development Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the years ending September 30th, 2014 to 2016. These responses are from the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries. Papers 32 and 33, the responses to the 21st report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Free Zones Company Limited for the years ended September 30th, 2012 to 2017. These responses are from the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Paper 35, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Planning and Development to the 6th report of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure on an inquiry into the establishment of systems for the maintenance of drainage and roadways. Paper number 36, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Planning and Development to the 5th report of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs on an inquiry into the waste management policies and initiatives of the state with specific focus on solid waste. Paper number 37, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Health to the 4th report of the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions and Statutory Authorities, including the THA, on an inquiry into the regulation and licensing of medical doctors by the Medical Board of Trinidad and Tobago. Paper number 38, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Health to the 10th report of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration on the inquiry into the potential benefits of traditional, complementary, and alternative medicine in the treatment of non-communicable diseases affecting the Trinidad and Tobago population. Paper number 39, the response of the Service Commissions Department to the 6th report of the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions and Statutory Authorities, including the THA, on an inquiry into the efficiency and effectiveness of the Teaching Service Commission. Paper number 40, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Works and Transport to the 24th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial years 2008 to 2011. Papers 41, 42, and 43, the responses to the 7th report of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure on an inquiry into the Public Transport Service Corporation with specific focus on the public bus service and maintenance of buses. These responses are from the Ministries of Works and Transport, Social Development and Family Services, and Education. Paper number 44, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries to the 10th report of the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises on an inquiry into the operations of Lake Asphalt, Trinidad and Tobago 1978 Limited, and to determine its effectiveness at fulfilling its mandate. Paper number 45, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development to the 12th report of the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions and Statutory Authorities, including the THA, on an inquiry into occupational safety and health compliance within the public service. Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Minister of Education.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. The administrative report of the National Institute of Higher Education, Research, Science and Technology for the fiscal year 2015 to 2016. The administrative report of the National Energy Skills Center for the fiscal year 2015-2016. The administrative report of the Youth Training and Employment Partnership Program for the fiscal year 2015-2016, and the administrative report of the University of Trinidad and Tobago for the fiscal year October the 1st, 2016 to September 30th, 2017. Thank you.
Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the honor to lay paper number 50, the administrative report of the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts for fiscal year 2015-16.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development, I have the honor to lay paper number 51, the annual report of the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago for the period September 14th, 2016 to September 15th, 2017. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Minister of National Security.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. The annual report of the Strategic Services Agency for the year 2018 and the annual report of the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board for the period October 1st, 2016 to September 30th, 2017.
Minister of Planning and Development.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 54, the administrative report of the Ministry of Planning and Sustainable Development for the period October 2012 to September 2013. Papers 60, 61, and 62, the annual report of the Environmental Management Authority for the years 2013, 2014, and 2015. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
And I'll now call on you as Public Administration. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Public Administration, I have the honor to lay paper number 55, the annual report of the National Information and Communication Technology Company Limited for the period 2017 to 2018.
And you could proceed for the Minister of Trade and Industry at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have the honor to lay the following papers on behalf of the Minister of Trade and Industry. Paper 56 to 57, the annual administrative report of the Evolving Technologies and Enterprise Development Company Limited for the years ended September 30th, 2016 and 2017. Paper number 58, the administrative report of the Trinidad and Tobago Creative Industries Company Limited and its subsidiaries for the year ended September 30th, 2015. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I'm on my legs, may I lay
Minister of Works and Transport and also Public Utilities.
Thank you very kindly.
Proceed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Works and Transport, I have the honor to lay paper number 59, the administrative report of the Ministry of Works and Transport for the period October 1st, 2012 to September 30th, 2013. On behalf of the Minister of Public Utilities, I have the honor to lay paper number 63, the annual administrative report of the National Maintenance Training and Security Company Limited for the year ended December 31st, 2016. Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The Attorney General.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. The Civil Proceedings Amendment Rules 2019, the Criminal Procedure Amendment Rules 2019, the Criminal Procedure Amendment Number 2 Rules 2019, and the Maintenance Amendment Rules 2019, listed as papers 65 to 68 inclusive.
Reports from committees.
Member for St. Anne's East.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the honor to present the following reports. 1, the 11th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on the follow-up inquiry into the status of implementation of the recommendations of the 3rd report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity into the treatment of child offenders. Report number 2, the 12th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on the sexual exploitation of children in Trinidad and Tobago, with specific focus on child prostitution and child pornography.
I call on the member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have the honor to present the 17th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination into the expenditure and internal controls of the East Port of Spain Development Company Limited.
Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Minister of Education, with regards to the dilapidated main building at the Faizabad Anglican Secondary School, which housed approximately 420 students, could the Minister state what remedial works are planned and when it will commence?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, following an inspection of the school by officials of the Ministry of Education, members of the school PTA, the school principal, and other stakeholders in August this year, it was determined that the level of deterioration that was observed required an expert assessment of the condition of the building. Concerns were mainly focused on the upper floor, and the Ministry of Education approached the Chief Design Officer of the Ministry of Works and Transport for a structural evaluation and recommendations. The Ministry of Education is awaiting the report from the Chief Design Officer in order to arrive at the appropriate remedial measures to be undertaken. Works will be undertaken as soon as this report is delivered to the Ministry of Education. Thank you very much.
Supplemental, member for Faizabad.
Thank you for that response, Honorable Minister. Minister, can you indicate what sort of time frame you anticipate that this report of the Chief Design Officer will be available to you?
Minister of Education.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are hoping that we are in receipt of that report before the end of this week. As I said before, as soon as that report has been received by us, we're going to commission work on that central block of the school. Thank you.
Supplemental, member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, can you indicate if the ministry intends to use the building? There's a vacant building next door to the school that belongs to Heritage Petroleum that is currently unoccupied. Can you indicate whether any consideration will be given to the use of that building on a temporary basis?
Minister of Education.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it all depends on the report that we obtain from the Chief Design Officer of the Ministry of Works. If, according to the report, that central block is unsuitable, then we look at alternatives. But again, we have to await the report from the Chief Design Officer. Thank you very much.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Minister of Education, given that classes have been disrupted at the Couva West Secondary School on a daily basis since the commencement of the new school term, could the Minister inform this House when will classes be fully resumed?
Minister of Education.
Again, thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, at the Couva West Secondary School, there are two major problems that have been identified. One is the low water pressure that prevents water from going up to the tanks. And two, numerous underground leaks that keep popping up from time to time. And this was as a result of poor design plumbing works by the previous contractor. In spite of this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, extensive plumbing repairs were carried out at this school during the July-August vacation period. Repairs on 4 major underground leaks were completed by the contractor that was assigned to the job by MTS, and as late as yesterday, the contractor was surveying the premises, and the report that we have received is that all is well for school to resume fully from today. Thank you very much.
Member for Couva South, supplemental.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Minister, are you aware that classes were dismissed today at 10:30 a.m. this morning, and another leak was discovered on the school premises this morning?
And the question is?
I am asking, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm asking the minister. He said that school will resume as of today. I am asking the minister if he's aware that another leak was discovered this morning on the school's compound, and is he aware that classes were dismissed today?
Fine. Minister of Education.
First of all, let me correct this statement. I did not say that school will resume, which will give the impression that school was not in session. Our responsibility at the Ministry of Education is to ensure that we provide access to an education for the nation's children. And we have been doing everything possible in spite of some of the problems that we have been experiencing. As I indicated just now, at Couva West Secondary, the major problem is the poor plumbing works that was done by the previous contractor. This has resulted in leaks being popping up from time to time, and I am not surprised to hear that another leak popped up today. The contractor is on site, and I'm sure he will be doing everything to ensure that a proper water supply is given to the school. Thank you very much.
Member for Couva South, Couva North had a hand up. Would you give way or? Okay, proceed, Couva South.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Minister, are you aware that this is your 5th year as the Minister of Education? And in addition to that, did you deliberately deceive the national community by saying all schools will be opened effective the beginning of this academic year?
You care to comment, Minister of Education?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, first of all, I was very careful in my statements to the media not to say that all schools will be open. In fact, if you are honest, you would know that we identified 5 schools that were experiencing problems. And that is the truth. Secondly, I am not aware that I have deceived the population. I will never do such a thing. Thank you very much.
Member for Urupuj West.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the Minister of Health, with regard to reports indicating that a mortuary at the San Fernando General Hospital is dysfunctional due to faulty refrigeration equipment, could the Minister indicate what urgent measures will be taken to address this situation?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, may I first start off by sincerely apologizing to the families who were affected by this very unfortunate incident. I do sincerely apologize to them. The Southwest Regional Health Authority has confirmed that one of its refrigerators at the San Fernando mortuary was not working for 1 day due to the malfunction of one of the breakers that supports the chiller fans at the mortuary located at the San Fernando General Teaching Hospital. As of Monday, September 2019 at 9 a.m. the following day, the chiller services were repaired and services have in fact returned to normalcy as of Monday, September 2nd, 2019. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Supplemental, Urupuj West.
Honourable Minister, is it true that some bodies were unrecognizable by family members because of the state of decomposition?
Minister of Health.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I cannot comment, and I think for the benefit of the families concerned, I think we all have a responsibility to treat with the issue in a very sensitive matter. To be having that brought to the Parliament, as you have described, I think, does not lend itself to the dignity of this centre. I have apologized to the families. The Southwest Regional Health Authority has in fact reached out to the families to put all the necessary counseling services in place. But I think the way you are trying to phrase it is below the dignity of this honourable House. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, in view of that unfortunate incident, can you indicate whether the authority has put in place any contingency measures should such an occurrence happen in the future.
Yes.
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the electrical system at the San Fernando Hospital is about 60 years old. Your fault, my fault, NAR fault, UNC fault, PNM fault. Attention should have been paid to that electrical system 40 years ago. 40 years ago. This government, about 3 months ago, approved a note for $30 million. $30 million in 2019. Your fault, my fault, UNC, NAR, doesn't matter. We take responsibility to fix problems. So the total upgrade of that electrical system, after cabinet approval of $29 million, it's a 2-year project, it's a massive project, which is to begin in the new fiscal year. In the interim, we are shoring up the electrical system, and hopefully these things would not happen again. We are trying our best. But as I said, 40 years ago, this should have been attended to. Your fault, my fault, NAR fault, UNC fault, PNM fault. Doesn't matter. But thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
No, supplemental questions have expired. It's 2 per question.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are 8 questions for oral answer. We'll be answering 7 of those questions. We're asking for a 2-week deferral of question number 254. With regard to the written responses, there are 4 questions for written answer. We'll be answering 3, and we're asking for a 2-week deferral for question number 242. Thank you.
Member for Fyzabad.
Mr. Speaker, question number 244 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a cross-functional team comprising officers from the divisions of school supervision, curriculum, and the student support services was set up with a mandate to conduct an assessment of the Superior West Secondary School's operation and address the gaps identified with the aim of restoring a school culture that is conducive to teaching and learning. Based on the assessment conducted, the team developed an action plan to target the following areas. 1, support for leadership and governance at the school through coaching and mentoring for the principal, vice principal, and the middle management in all areas of school operations. This was initiated during the July-August vacation period and is ongoing. 2, review of the safety and the security measures outlined in the school discipline plan to enhance the supervision of students and address incidents of indiscipline. The protocol for entry and exit of the compound and the block supervision have been effected for the new term. 3, the conduct of professional development of staff in areas such as classroom management, identifying students at risk, behavior management strategies, conflict resolution, and mediation during the school year. 4, improvement of the curriculum delivery and assessment, focusing on the clinical supervision, adapting schemes in all subject areas, and utilizing alternative assessment strategies. Subject action plans for each department to be implemented and monitored during the term. 5, reduction of student absenteeism through the introduction of various activities such as clubs and review of the prefect system. And 6, strengthening of stakeholder engagement by including parents, in making decisions that affect their children by their participation on school-based management team meetings. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the support of the cross-functional team will continue in the new term, and it is expected that the above measures will, 1, promote a positive school culture conducive to learning and teaching, 2, improve classroom management and the curriculum delivery, 3, reduce incidents of indiscipline, and 4, increase students' attendance. Thank you.
Supplemental, member for Faisabat.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, can you indicate whether you intend to have a report from this cross-functional team to assess the effectiveness and how soon you would want that review done or expect that review?
Minister of Education.
Yes, that is a very appropriate question, and I'm very happy to answer. We have already started receiving reports. This cross-functional team was put in place towards the end of last term, and before the end of the third term, we received the first report. Thank you.
Question 245. Member for Faisabat.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 245 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Leader, member for Labrie.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service were the first responders and conducted their investigations, which included the collection of evidence as well as interviews with affected persons. The Occupational Safety and Health Agency also conducted an investigation with interviews and a site visit. The Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries met with representatives of Massey Energy Petroleum Resources Limited, as well as 2 other employees of TCSL on June 4, 2019, and signed statements were collected. In addition, the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries conducted a site visit of the area where the incident occurred and witnessed the sampling of the residue inside the tank that was collected by an independent third party for further testing. A report with the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries preliminary findings has been prepared. The report will be finalized upon receipt of the final reports from Massey Energy and the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Services.
Supplemental, member for Faisabat.
Thank you, member. Minister, can you indicate whether any form of compensation has been given to the affected family?
Member for Labrie.
As I indicated, once we have finalized our report, then any determinations of that nature would be contemplated.
Supplemental, member for Faisabat.
Can you indicate at this point whether any OSHA standards have been breached in this particular incident or were breached?
MP for Labrie.
When we finalize the report, we would determine if any new measures need to be put in place to prevent incidents of this nature from occurring in the future. We do take our regulatory role very seriously, and we try to adopt any lessons learned from incidents such as this.
Supplemental? Proceed. Member for Faisabat.
Thank you, member. Can you indicate when you expect a final report? Because this incident took place on the 4th of June, and is, of course, is of public importance.
So the ministry has already completed its report. We're just waiting on submissions from Massey Energy and the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Services to complete our report.
Member for Faisabat, next question.
Thank you. Question number 246 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, in anticipation of the impending rain, sorry, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sorry. In anticipation of the impending rainy season, the Ministry of Works and Transport embarked on an aggressive desilting program, which started with 3 phases, accumulating 350 projects. This has been extended to a 4th phase, where we would have increased the number of projects to close to 400. This was divided into 4 areas, the north, south, central, and the east. In the Faizabad area, which falls in the southern part, there were 65 projects earmarked for the southern area in Faizabad itself, there were 9 projects, 8 of which have been completed. The final project should be completed within the next 2 weeks. A listing of the 9 projects are the Kunapo River from Standard Road to Chatur Avenue to the Siparia Road, Faizabad, cleaning and desilting rivers for a distance of 3,500 meters completed. Dock Pond River downstream, La Fortune Plock Road, Woodland to the St. John's Gate at St. John's, Branch Trace, Avocat, cleaning and desilting river for a distance of 2,000 meters completed. Rio Negro River downstream of the Akbar Trace Community Center to St. John's, Branch Trace, Avocat, cleaning and desilting river for a distance of 2,000 meters completed. Tuit Drain downstream of the community center, Harris Village to St. John Village, South Oropuch, cleaning and desilting river for a distance of 1,000 meters completed. The Mulal River and tributaries downstream of the Faizabad, Guapo Road to the Kunapo River, cleaning and desilting river for a distance of 3,000 meters completed. Mahatu River downstream of the Mondesi Road to Farm Road, cleaning and desilting river for a distance of 2,300 meters completed. Silver Stream River downstream of the tennis court, Mondesi to downstream of the bridge at the southern main road, Dow Village, cleaning and desilting river for a distance of 3,000 meters completed. The Timit River downstream of the bridge of Silver Stream Road to Mahatu River, cleaning and desilting river for a distance of 1,500 meters completed. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the final project there is the desilting of the St. John River downstream to the St. John's Gate to the Godino River. That should be completed within the next 2 weeks. Thank you.
Supplemental, member for Faizabad.
Thank you for that response, Minister. Minister, can you indicate, give us a little status update on the actual sluice gates at the St. John's Trace? The repair of the sluice gates.
I'm considering that to be it's totally different. It's directly related. Mr. Works, directly related?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the sluice gates are different from the desilting program.
Right. Well, I would not entertain that question then.
However, there is a...
Member, no, hold on. It must, the question must be directly related to the answer that would have been given. Right, so I just wanted that clarity. So I will, another supplemental? Yes. Okay, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Minister, are you satisfied that the works that you've outlined are going to be sufficient to prevent any flooding in that area that has occurred last year and the year before?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I cannot guarantee that there will be no flooding. These areas are low-lying areas, and with all the efforts that were made to desilt the watercourses, we have to accept the fact that flooding is as a result of the capacity of the watercourses and the volume of rainfall. So we would have done our best in maintaining and cleaning the watercourses, but there's no guarantee in these low-lying areas in the rainy season that we will avoid the flooding in some of these areas.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, in addition to these works, which are routine, does the ministry have any additional plans to address that perennial problem of flooding, in addition to the routine cleaning and so on?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Yes. So, Deputy Speaker, this country would have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on studies, and so there are several studies for East, West, North, and South Trinidad. What the ministry is doing at this point in time is working with the CAF, the Andean Development Bank, where we are actually putting forward to the cabinet very shortly an operational plan using all these studies that were the ministry to come up with an operational plan to address flooding in the short, medium, and long term, which includes the Faizabad area. Thank you.
Oropuch West.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 249 to the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The lithotripsy services at San Fernando General Hospital commenced on 1st October 2018 under this P&M government. For the period October 1st, 2018 to 25th April 2019, there were 262 lithotripsy procedures performed. Due to voltage fluctuations, the engineers at the facility advised against the continued use of the equipment, as it might have compromised both the equipment and patient safety. As of 3rd July 2019, works and repairs were conducted on the electricity supply, which is now stable and reliable. As a result, the lithotripsy service has been restored and is fully functional since July 2019. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Supplemental, Urupuch West.
Honourable Minister, up to recently, there was some postponement. My question is, can this lithotripsy services now be moved to the Children's Hospital instead of that beautiful hospital be used as a drugstore?
Thank you very much,
Minister of
Thank you very much. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it must be noted that during the period 2010 to 2015, when the Member of Parliament for Faizabad was the CEO, was the chairman, and the member for Barataria Sawan was the Minister of Health, the C-arm from the lithotripsy machine was removed and sent to the urology theater. Removed. In 2013, do you know how many services were performed under the chairmanship of Faizabad? 8. 8. Do you know how many were performed in 2014? 98. For 2 years. For 2 years. Member for Parliament for Faizabad and Barata Sawat did 106. We have done, in 9 months, 262, I said. 100% increase over what Faizabad did. 8 in 2013, 98 in 2014. You must check with your colleagues before you ask these questions. So, the lithotripsy services...
Minister of Health, 1 second. Minister, Urupuch West, you ask your question, you are getting an answer. You will have, hold on, Minister of Health, hold on. You will have the opportunity again for an additional supplemental. Rest assured. Proceed.
I look forward heartily to another supplemental because there's much more to see. So let me repeat. In 2013, you performed 8. In 2014, you performed 98. 2 years. Because you moved the C-arm from there, but you were the chairman of the board, and Barataria Sawan was the Minister of Health. You're holding me accountable now. We have bought a brand new lithotripsy machine because the old one had reached end of life, and the last board did nothing, knowing that the machine was coming to end of life. Your fault, my fault, PNM fault, UNC fault, NAR fault, doesn't matter. We are here to fix the problems that we inherited. So we bought a new machine, and we are also upgrading the entire electrical system at San Fernando Hospital, which should have been done 20, 30, 40 years ago. So that is what we are doing. And we have done 100% more lithotripsy services in 9 months than UNC did in 2 years.
Please.
So maybe it haven't been disturbed. In 2013, they did 8. 8 single digits. We have done 262 in 2 years. It needs repeating. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Supplemental member Urupuch West. Proceed.
Honourable Minister, are you aware that the buck stops with you and you're not supposed to be blaming Faizabad? Are you aware of it?
Okay.
That he's in charge.
I would not entertain that question. Member for Urupuch West, next question.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 250 to the Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Land Settlement Agency, which falls under the purview of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, was created under the State Law and Regularization of Tenure Act, Chapter 5705, to implement the provisions of the Act in Trinidad, whereas the Tobago House of Assembly is the body responsible for state land in Tobago. Squatters in occupation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of lands prior to January 1st, 1998, were given until October 27, 2000, to apply for a certificate of comfort. Applicants who met all criteria are processed and issued with a certificate of comfort. Distribution of certificate of comforts by the Land Settlement Agency have been taking place over the past 20 years, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The LSA is committed to continue distribution of COCs to eligible squatters throughout Trinidad. Squatters in Crown Trees Enterprise are part of this ongoing exercise, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Supplemental member for Urupuch West.
Well, Minister, how many applications, the certificate of comfort, are yet to be processed?
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are thousands of applicants for the COCs, and they're being processed by this government right now. As a matter of fact, I'll even go so far as to say that this is the first government who have moved people from certificate of comfort to statutory release. It's never been done before. So it's a three-step process. It's the first government, because there's a three-step process, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to move from certificate of comfort to statutory release and deed of lease. It is the first time in the history of Trinidad and Tobago by this government that we have moved people from certificate of comfort to statutory release, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Supplemental, Urupuch West.
Honourable Minister, how many statutory leases, which you call deed of leases, were issued? And I'll ask you next question after. How many?
You can provide that information, sir. Go ahead, proceed.
Certainly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We have, as I said, we have moved people from certificate of comfort to statutory release. We have so far issued 35 statutory releases, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Because it's a slow process, unless the person, if you understand the process well, unless you have paid, you understand, you have a timeline, right? You do have a timeline. So that we are processed. And again, I'll boast, it's the first time any government has moved from certificate of comfort. And the last administration, you issued several certificates of comfort, but never moved people to statutory releases.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 253 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, again, question 253. The ministry would have embarked on an aggressive desilting program in the central area where the Couva constituency falls. 107 desilting programs were undertaken. In Couva, 11 of these projects took place, and the 11 areas are the Couva River from the Calibe Road to Calibe Beach, Couva, Orange Valley Main Drain, Waterloo, the Laquesi River upstream to Joyce Road, Agustini Settlement Main Drain and tributaries, Southern Main Road to Perseverance Road, Sonilado Main Drain, Macbean Couva, Sweetas Main Drain, Presal Couva, Presal River, Presal Couva, Roystonia and tributaries, Southern Main Road, Freeport, Mandillion River from Solomon Holchoy Highway to the Southern Main Road, and the Powdari River, Presal, and the Factory Road and tributaries to the Honda River. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I will now refer to question 251, and I'll call any member for Couva North. No, sorry, for Urupuch West.
Thank you. Question number 251 to the Minister of Community Development, Culture and Arts.
Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the question itself is misleading. There were no cost overruns on the original building works, and the cost of the completion of the San Fernando North Community Center, it is not 16.8 million as stated in the question. The approved contract sum for the completion of the center was $15,864,795.88, inclusive of the original contract sum, as well as the cost of constructing a retaining wall, which was added to the scope of works after the original contract sum was finalized, plus value-added tax.
Supplemental, Urupuch West.
Was the contractor that was awarded this contract?
Please, AG, hold on. Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't know that the name of the contractor was included in the original question scope, and therefore, if another question is filed, we can answer that kind of question that's coming now.
No problem. Supplemental, Orupuch West?
So I will take it you would not know also whether it was sole select, would you?
I will not entertain that question. I will not entertain that question. Hold on, one sec. Members, under oral questions, as identified by the Leader of the House, question number 254 has been deferred for 2 weeks, and under written questions, question number 242 has also been deferred for 2 weeks.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers.
The Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I wish to announce that Budget 2020 will be read on Monday, the 7th of October, 2019.
Personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister, public business, government business, bill second reading.
I call upon the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Firearms Act, Chapter 1601, be now read a second time. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we come before the people of Trinidad and Tobago in this House of Representatives to complete the work begun in the Senate on the 2nd of July 2019. This bill before us, the Firearms Act, Chapter 1601, as it is proposed to be amended, is 28 clauses in length. It proposes a renovation of the law which is needed at this point in Trinidad and Tobago's societal context, in its progress as a country, and certainly in terms of the improvement of our laws within the meaning of that phrase and concept as captured in Section 53 of the Constitution, where we assemble to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of our country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the legislation to be amended is the Firearms Act, Chapter 1601. The firearms laws of Trinidad and Tobago were in effect first codified on March 22nd, 1909, when we had the Firearms and Ammunition Ordinance, Chapter 30, Number 5. Back then, the sole mission was effectively to define and distinguish the terms rifle versus gun. The proposal that a license ought to be in respect of individual firearms and that a certificate of fitness be a requirement for the issuance of firearms. It really was in 1970 that the modern law began to take shape. And in 1970, on the 2nd of November 1970, there was a significant consideration of the firearms law, and it was in fact codified by Act of Parliament number 44 of 1970. Since then, we note that there have been 11 amendments, this being the 12th proposed amendment. But when you look at the history of amendments, the firearms legislation really found itself coming into center focus when the society as a whole had to take note of the state and condition of the country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in coming across the readings of the reports of the 1976 Constitution, and in looking at the 1973 report in particular, Trinidad and Tobago was then described as a society wrestling with a scourge of arms and ammunition. That was in 1973. In 1973, the writers of the report that preceded the Constitution of 1976 took the view that Trinidad and Tobago was in difficulty. I say that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as we stand now in 2019, to say that our society as a whole has been grappling with a situation of arms and ammunition for quite some time. In 2011, the then government presided over by the member for Siparia, took to an increase in fines and penalties of approximately 50%. And the Firearms Act, as it was amended in 2011, came, interestingly, with two other legislative proposals coming then into the law. Firstly, the amendments to the bail legislation, and secondly, the amendments to the anti-gang laws, introduction of anti-gang laws. Back then, there was a unanimous support, certainly provided by the then sitting PNM opposition, that anti-gang laws should be a feature of our laws, and that bail amendments should find themselves such that you, as an accused, would be prohibited from accessing bail under certain circumstances and conditions. No bail for 120 days, and then consideration after 1 year. In that particular period of time, Trinidad and Tobago as a society found itself statistically dealing with information which feeds into this debate. I'll say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this law, as we come now, really proposes a few basic things. First of all, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we propose to introduce a tiered system of treatment of offenders. We propose in the several clauses before us to treat with how one is to be managed in a summary and indictable circumstance, in the breakdown on first offense, second offense, and third offense. Secondly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in treating with that improvement of how you treat with first offense, second offense, and third offense, we improve by way of penalties, a serious treatment now added to take you on the indictable procedures, no fines permitted, and if you're on a third occasion, in certain circumstances, which I'll come to when I get to the individual clauses, we are asking the Parliament to set the tone via Section 53 of the Constitution that you shall be considered as having subjected yourself to natural life imprisonment. The third thing that we do, Mr. Deputy Speaker, very importantly, is that we introduce into law for the first time ever in this country the offense of trafficking in firearms, to be found by the insertion of a new Section 9A, as it is proposed to be inserted, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by Clause 6 of the bill. The last thing that we do, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is to ensure that we suggest to the judiciary, via this debate, via the tool of pepper and heart, how we are going to treat with the application of the Interpretation Act. And in particular, I'm referring to Sections 68, 69, and 69A of the Interpretation Act, Chapter 301. That is the general purpose. It is incumbent upon me to state that this general legitimate aim that we pursue is to be grounded in a proportional consideration. We are looking at the proportionality and therefore the constitutionality of this law. And I intend, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in speaking and demonstrating the proportionality of this law, to demonstrate what Trinidad and Tobago is dealing with, why we as a society must introduce law of this kind, and therefore demonstrate not only a legitimate aim, and that the measures that we seek to add to treat with this issue are proportionate and rationally connected to that aim, but also that we do not go too far in treating with this law in such a way as to be deemed to be breaking the proportionality or excessive or arbitrary in the prescriptions of law. That, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I do for the aid of interpretation in the event that this law should find itself subject to criticism before the courts of Trinidad and Tobago. I am setting out the case for the constitutionality of this law. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our constitution is a unique constitution. In the Commonwealth Caribbean, Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago both have the 3/5 aspects of treatment. In Jamaica, it's 2/3 by way of special majority. In Trinidad and Tobago, it is 3/5 by way of special majority treatment. But Trinidad and Tobago stands unique in its constitutional measure. We are the only Commonwealth country that has the special majority qualification in Section 13 of the Constitution, as it is circumscribed or prescribed by a requirement that it must be suitable to democracy such as Trinidad and Tobago. In other words, we are the only jurisdiction in the Commonwealth that allows for our courts to strike down a law passed with the requisite special majority in the circumstance of the Section 13 language. There has not yet been a test case on the Section 13 interpretation of proportionality and constitutionality by the highest court of the land, which is the Privy Council. That is certainly something which would help to settle our law. But this law and this statement of our constitutional prescription therefore requires us to demonstrate where Trinidad and Tobago is on the specific purpose of what firearms represent to our country. What is the risk? What is the establishment of dangerousness? And what is the prescription that the courts ought to consider in the round, in particular as to whether it is constitutional to provide the mechanism of natural life imprisonment as a maximum sentence and not minimum sentence or mandatory sentence. And in particular, whether the modern penological theories as to offender management, and in particular the context of rehabilitation alongside retribution, punishment, and dissuasion ought to find itself. So let's dive into the state and condition of Trinidad and Tobago. Let us set the record of the legitimate aim and the rational connection with this law. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the first thing that I do is to state obviously that we're treating with the firearms legislation. Trinidad and Tobago is an island surrounded by 360 degrees of water. In that 360-degree radius around us, as we move along our boundaries, our radius only allows us to touch a circumference in very individual ways. Direct interception, Coast Guard surveillance, radar surveillance. But certainly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with the failure to introduce and to put into operation that which Trinidad and Tobago acquired in the period 2009, and I refer specifically to the offshore patrol vessels, in the cancellation of that contract, Trinidad and Tobago's waters were left wide open and exposed. In addition, as I'm sure the Minister of National Security will speak to what happened to our security and intelligence mechanisms in that period. What is the short result and statement of that? There has been an uptick in firearm possession, in firearm detection, in the number of cases before the courts, but there has also been the introduction of very dangerous forms of firearms, and I refer particularly to automatic weapons, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Let's look at this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and let's look at the most important indicator of the most heinous crime, and that is murder. In Trinidad and Tobago, as the Crime and Problem Analysis branch of the TTPS have reported us, reported firearm-related murders for the period 2015 to 2019. I'll focus on that period. There have been 1,679 firearm-related murders in that period up to the 21st of June 2019. When we look at it against reported gang-related murders, and we look at it against gang-related murders committed with firearms, it is noticeable, if I take the District of Port of Spain alone, for 2015, there were 80 firearm-related murders, 2016, 54, 2017, 62, 2018, 60, 2019, as at June, reported this year, 34. When we compare that against gang-related murders committed with firearms, I'm able to tell you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, gang-related murders with firearms were 91% of the figure in 2015, 64% of the figure in 2016, 59% of the figure in 2017, 71% of the figure in 2018, and 73% of the figure in 2019 as we count. So I'm jumping to gang-related homicides with firearms and the statistical number of murders committed by firearms. Mr. Deputy Speaker, hence my reference to the trilogy of laws in the period 2011 in particular, bail amendment, anti-gang, and firearm amendments. That three came together. We as a government were not privileged to have the support of bail amendments or anti-gang amendments or indeed firearm amendments as easily as my colleagues had support by a then opposition, but we are here today treating with this law. Let's look at the statistical information for persons charged in the period 2009 to 2019, a 10-year period. Mr. Deputy Speaker, 2009, there were 390 people charged. 2010, 382. 2011, 425. 2012, 420. 2013, 465. 2014, 585. 2015, 691. In other words, a steady increase in firearms found and seized in the period 2010 to 2016. 2015, I said 691. 2016, 765. 2017, 1,064. 2018, 988. 2019, as found today, 212, for a total figure of 6,387. What does that say? Put quite simply, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service have been finding and detecting more firearms, evidencing that they're doing more work and being more successful, and also perhaps that there are more firearms in the jurisdiction. Mr. Deputy Speaker, what is interesting in this particular statistical pullout from the CAPA at TTPS, Crime and Problem Analysis Branch, is that submachine guns and machine guns as a feature, only if I look at the figure submachine guns, for the entire period 2009 straight up to 2016, there were 0 fines and detections. 2017, 23. 2018, 14. 2019, 6, for a total of 43. Machine guns have been with us for some time. 2009, 7. 2010, 8. 2011, 7. 2012, 6. 2013, 12. 2014, 18. 2015, 23. 2016, 16. 0 for 2017, 0 for 2018, 0 for 2019. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there have been firearms, submachine guns, machine guns as a feature, submachine guns in particular, smaller compact weapons, finding themselves as features in our landscape right now. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the reports of firearm offenses, in the 10-year period 2009 to 2019, there have been 17,363 firearm offenses, 11,168 for robberies, 2,631 for woundings and shootings, and in that 10-year period for murders, 3,472. Are the figures much different? Mr. Deputy Speaker, 2015 there were 340, 2013 320, 2017 337, 2016 351, 2019 195. The numbers are there regardless of whether, as my friend for St. Joseph said, PNM, UNC, NAR, pretty much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, firearms have been around in the form of the tool for choice in committing crimes, certainly murders, in our jurisdiction for quite some time. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we looked at the figure for arrests under the positions, we have a significant uptick in arrests, certainly in anti-gang. We now have arrests under the Anti-Gang Act. We have arrests under the Dangerous Drugs Act, Anti-Terrorism Act, Trafficking in Persons Act, kidnapping, serious detection of crime rates. Mr. Deputy Speaker, if we take the detection rate from 2009 to 2019, the figures are as follows year on year. 17%, 16%, 19%, 17%, 18%, 23%, 23%, 24%, 2016, 31%, 2017, 34%, 2018, and currently 28%, 2019. In other words, the detection rate is going consistently up. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm bound to ask, what does that mean for the average citizen in Trinidad and Tobago? Do we feel a sense of security, knowing that more firearms are being found, more offenses are being detected, the police are harder at work, matters are before the court? Does that help our society to wrestle with this problem as we rebuild the structures in treating with law and order and justice? Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I do intend in my wrap-up to spend quite a bit of time on connecting that structure together to demonstrate how the system is improved. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the submission today is that this law is necessary because firearms are a feature of fear and certainly a feature of criminality in our country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I said in the Senate that I don't often refer to newspaper reports, but I'm going, as I did then, to now refer to them in this House, because it gives us a little bit of a litmus test in what our news is certainly recording. I do believe, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that sometimes our news isn't best for Trinidad and Tobago. I note, for instance, in the United States of America, there have been upward of 124 mass murders for the year in that country. Let me repeat. Upward of 124 mass murders for the year, murders with more than 4 people, and that is a feature that is definitely underreported in that jurisdiction. I note that in Jamaica, the figure and the news coverage is also underreported, notwithstanding the sense of there being, in reality, a limited state of emergency or a state of emergency in certain parishes in Jamaica. But this is Trinidad and Tobago, and perhaps we're not too far off the Roman Colosseum, where that kind of news sells faster than anything else. This is our democracy. Daily Express, schoolgirl shot in Port of Spain, stable in hospital. Yassi Gonzalez, June 18th, 2019. 11-year-old girl shot. Daily Express, boy balls for murdered mom, gunned down on the streets, June 18th, 2019. A mother of 3 executed at the side of the road in Santa Cruz. Daily Express, Bel Air restaurateur attacked, robbed at gates to home, Suzanne Mohammed, June 19th, 2019. Beaten, robbed, large quantity of cash. Daily Express, the Buck Pundit has been shot, Suzanne Mohammed, June 20th, 2019. Guardian, cops seize gun ammo in central raids by Rondo Dowlat, Friday, May 24th, 2019. Guard murdered heading to first day of work, Trinidad Guardian, June 13th, 2019. Security guard shot dead at Woodbrook Casino. Again, CNC3 coverage, Rondo Dowlat. Guardian, criminals switching to military weapons, senior cop by Shaliza Hassan Ali, Wednesday, 20th February 2019. Mr. Deputy Speaker, high-powered weapons seized at Port of Spain Port, Loop TT, series of high-powered weapons, 13th May 2019. Mr. Deputy Speaker, drive-by shooting in Cocorite. And then we get, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to an interesting piece from the United States Department of Justice, Northern District of Georgia, Wednesday, 30th May 2018, defendants sentenced for illegally purchasing 36 guns and smuggling them from Georgia to Trinidad and Tobago. Not often I bring newspapers as an aid, but I want to demonstrate the rationality of the Section 13 conversation, Mr. Deputy Speaker. What does the judiciary tell us? The judiciary tells us that there are 44,000 cases in arrears at the magistracy, and that is at July 31st, 2018, their last reporting date. Of that 44,000 odd cases, 11,000 odd are for summary offenses, and roughly 33,000 straight for indictable offenses. Arms and ammunition, there are 7,045 cases pending. When we look to the number of first hearings at the magistracy, we're looking at 477 in the period 2015 to 2018. When we look to matters disposed for the same period, 4,636. When we look to time for disposition, we're seeing a disaggregation of most matters under 3 to 5 years, but there are certainly matters above 10 years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, what I'm referring to here, put in summary form, is that the judiciary has certainly taken this task in terms of its pursuit of this crime in the thousands, but that the rate of discovery of firearms in our society by far outstrips the judicial throughput, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let's get to the bill. Let's get to further aspects of the law. We in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in this bill are proposing that we amend several of our sections, that we amend sections 2, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 13A, 13B, 14, 15, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, and Section 40 of the Firearms Act. And in that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in particular, we are moving away from the prescriptions. If we look at Section 6 of the Firearms Act, we are looking at moving away from the manner in which the law treated with possession of a firearm without lawful excuse. And we're saying the current law, which says on summary conviction you're exposed to a fine of $15,000 and imprisonment for 8 years, and the current position where you are exposed to, on conviction for indictment, on indictment, to imprisonment for 15 years, that is simply inadequate for Trinidad and Tobago. Secondly, we're seeing that an offense ought not to attract as low a penalty as a fine of $75,000 and 15 years, or 20 years in the event that there is a breach of a more serious aspect of possession if you are not an authorized officer in possession of prohibited weapons. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the current law does not provide a disaggregation of how you treat with a first-time offender, a second-time offender, a third-time offender. The fines at summary level are very low. The term of imprisonment, very low. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the maximum sentence that we see in the current law is 25 years in the Firearms Act. In this bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we therefore have to wrestle with the fact that the sentencing that this Parliament is allowed to suggest, not to dictate, not to breach the separation of powers principle, not to interfere with the Section 5 rights in particular in respect of due process and trial and fairness, etc. But the sentencing aspects in our laws for firearm possession, most deadly possession, are at $15,000 and 8 years on the summary level. Listen to this. In our country, we treat with penalties under the Financial Institutions Act, penalties under the Securities Act, and penalties under the Insurance Act as follows. Listen to this one. Contravention of regulations under the Financial Institutions Act. Listen to this. If an individual contravenes the regulations, meaning subsidiary legislation, here's what they're exposed to. $5 million in fine, 5 years imprisonment, $500,000 daily for a continuing offense. For a company, $5 million, 5-year imprisonment. Company itself, $5 million, $500,000 daily. Continuing offense. Failure to disclose an interest. Administrative fine, $125,000. Criminal penalty, $500,000. Under the Securities Act, failure to disclose an interest, $500,000, 2 years. Under the Insurance Act, $600,000, 2 years. I've just taken the example to show that under our financial legislative measures, we treat the breach of a regulation with by far more severity than we treat with the possession of a firearm, the use of a firearm. There was no treatment for trafficking in firearms, whilst we have our citizens locked in their homes and afraid of their own society. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we go to another rational aim for this law, it's noteworthy that our law is guided in terms of the judicial consideration of sentencing. We are guided by two aspects. Number one, the statute which says what the maximum penalties can be, and number two, the sentencing guidelines that the court suggests are to be considered when prescribing a sentence, judicial officer in any case. Mr. Deputy Speaker, The judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago produced a sentencing handbook in the year 2016. And I'd like for the record to give you an example with the following caveat. It is a usual consideration that defendants who find themselves before the court and who plead guilty at the earliest opportunity may be considered, and in most instances are considered, for an early discount of 1/3 of any sentence that they may have been exposed to. Secondly, judicial officers also tend to offer a rebate in terms of time spent in pre-trial custody. Thirdly, in looking at the characteristics of the defendant, the potential for rehabilitation, etc., persons who find themselves before the court for sentencing, for firearm-related sentences, have resulted, as the Judiciary Sentencing Guidelines tell us in black and white, in the Judicial Institute, Education Institute, published book, publication of the JEI of TT, in the following examples. In the case of Charles Fonilier Waldron versus PC Ashby, a magisterial appeal in the year 2000, convicted of armed robbery, sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. In the case of Floyd versus McDowell, we saw 3 years imprisonment, hard labor. In the case of Phillips versus Bernard, Court of Appeal, Magisterial Appeal 176/99, we see here robbery, firearms, violence, threats to kill, 5 years imprisonment, hard labor. In Mutilal versus Pamponet, 3 years imprisonment, hard labor. Kendall Welch versus Caesar Jordan, 5 years imprisonment. Nicholas Williams versus Keith Thompson, a 2011 case, possession of firearm, etc. We're looking there, 3 years imprisonment, hard labor for possession, 6 months imprisonment, possession of ammunition, etc. Tyrell Taylor, 2010 judgment, possession, firearm, etc. We look here, 3 months imprisonment with hard labor, Mr. Deputy Speaker. What we have seen inside of the judicial sentencing approach is that because our law operates by virtue of sections 68, 69, and 69A of the Interpretation Act, such that when a law prescribes a penalty in terms of a fine or in terms of a number of years of imprisonment, the Interpretation Act and the judicial sentencing tells us that that is the maximum sentence that may be prescribed. Our laws, if we look in particular to the case of Barry Francis, have frowned upon minimum sentencing, where you tell a defendant by virtue of statute that you are, if you commit an offense, you're guaranteed to serve a minimum of a certain number of years, in that case 25 years. Those laws have been frowned upon by our courts and certainly by our Court of Appeal, which settled the law applying the Surratt principles. But what is very interesting, and I recommend to honorable members, is a particular case coming from the Caribbean Court of Justice. It's an appeal from the Appeal Court of Barbados, CCJ appeal number BBCR 2017 of 004, and that was delivered on the 2nd of May 2019. May I ask Mr. Deputy Speaker what time I end in full time?
At 3:10.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I will quickly add this to the record, and that is full time, sir. Yes?
Full time.
Okay.
Full 45.
This particular case looked at what is the consequence of entering an early plea of guilt, what is the meaning of life imprisonment, what is the discount for entry of an early plea, whether one had to have the dangerousness of the accused established, the factors that a judicial officer ought to consider in looking at life imprisonment, what the aspects of sentencing should include, retribution, punishment, deterrence, and certainly rehabilitation. And very importantly, they looked at a number of Trinidad and Tobago decisions. And I want to refer particularly to the case of Naresh Budram, and it's to be found at paragraphs 51, 52, and 53. Effectively, this court, the CCJ, in looking at Trinidad and Tobago jurisprudence, noted that theoretically, notwithstanding precedents, looking at penological objectives, that the law was effectively all over the place. That judicial sentencing was such that you could not with precision have a benefit as to what one is likely to have in certain circumstances, and necessarily so because the judiciary ought to have the latitude under the Constitution to consider its case-by-case management and what is appropriate in each individual circumstance. But they looked at times changing at paragraph 52, and that many, a global trend, have suggested that in moving away from death penalty, certainly as Pratt and Morgan has applied in our case, that we're seeing life sentences coming in, but they noted in particular that in Trinidad and Tobago, the range of incarceration for life imprisonment, as it is defined in our laws, certainly coming out of the jurisprudence in the Barry Francis case, which was a dangerous drugs case where life imprisonment is used, we have, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the CCJ telling us in Trinidad and Tobago, the range of incarceration is 15 to 25 years. So when we see life stated in legislation, life in Trinidad and Tobago is 15 to 25 years. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is certainly the case that sentencing must always, and quintessentially so, remain a judicial function that is to be strictly preserved by a parliament. Mr. Deputy Speaker, having laid down a few of the markers, let me turn quickly to the familiar content of the bill, because there's a lot of it that is effectively an applied formula in the circumstances of the bill. Let me say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, immediately, I'll jump to clause 6, which is the insertion of a new section 9A. And what we're saying in this law, if we look at clause 6, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Act as amended to insert a new 9A. We're introducing trafficking of firearm or prohibited weapon. We are saying a person who has in his possession 2 or more firearms or prohibited weapons is deemed to have the firearm or prohibited weapon for the purpose of trafficking the firearm or prohibited weapon unless the contrary is proved, the burden of proof being on the accused. And such person commits an offense is liable, summary conviction, fine of $1 million, imprisonment 15 years. On indictment first offense, 20 years. Indictment second offense, 25 years. Indictment third offense, imprisonment for life. Stick a pin. Life is defined in this bill in clause 2 as meaning the natural life of a person. Why have we done that? In cognizance of the decision in Allen and the Queen, which is the case I referred to in the CCJ matter, it is necessary for Parliament to define its intention that life should certainly no longer be at its maximum level 15 to 25 years. Life is intended as an upper maximum ceiling limit to mean the natural life of the person. What does this law say? This law says if you are found with a firearm and another firearm, 2 firearms, you are in possession and brought before the courts and you are convicted on a 3rd occasion for 2 firearms. Bear in mind Section 5 of the Firearms Act says possession is possession without lawful excuse. You have a defense. Your animus is there. It must be tested. If you are convicted on a 3rd occasion, the judiciary now has the fighting chance in looking at the needs of the population to prescribe natural life imprisonment. This law is intended to cause people to think twice. You know that you are lucky enough to be out with liberty, released from your 3 years or 6 months that you may have gotten on 1st or 2nd occasion. You find yourself before a court with 2 firearms, not 1. You should be with the fear of God Almighty in your soul that you are not brought before a court and convicted on a 3rd occasion, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is this same approach that we approach the amendments to Clause 3, where we look at Section 6 of the Act, which is the basic possession offense. Again, we go summary, indictment first offense, indictment second offense, or any subsequent offense, and indictment on a second or subsequent offense, taking us right down into the summary and indictable management of a significant increase in penalties, up to $1 million, imprisonment for 15 years, then 20 years, then 25 years. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are saying to all persons now enjoying liberty, lucky enough to be walking the streets of Trinidad and Tobago with a conviction under their belt and out. This law is intended to send a message from the Parliament via Section 53 of the Constitution to tell you you need to be afraid that you are not caught with this particular position and convicted. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is very important to note that we are managing the offenses again similarly as I've described for Section 6 amendment via Clause 3, for Section 9 amendment in Clause 6, in the introduction of a new 9A. In all of these clauses that we go further, in Clauses 7 onward, we are again marrying up the treatment of first offense, second offense, and third offense. Mr. Deputy Speaker, permit me to say that when we use the term deemed to be in possession for the purposes of trafficking, we are engaging in a reversal of burden of proof. I wish to assure honourable members that Section 5 of the Constitution is the section which allows us to not offend the law and certainly the Constitution by allowing for the reversal of burden of proof. That is to be found in Section 5(2) of the Constitution, where the burden, you are deemed to be innocent until proven guilty. However, that does not prohibit the law from being exercised such that you have a burden put upon you to discharge. I'll remind that burden upon the accused to be discharged is dealt with on a balance of probabilities basis. It then returns to the prosecution for proof beyond reasonable doubt to be considered in these circumstances. Again, rooting the concept of constitutionality in Clause 9, in Clause 6, which is the introduction of a new Section 9B, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are very careful inside of this law to preserve the ability for reasonable excuse, lawful excuse. But what we do say inside of this law, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that the law needs to be amplified because as our Interpretation Act prescribes, we are and must be cognizant of the fact that the statement of offense, be it by way of penalty in terms of fines or by way of terms of imprisonment, those are maximum statements of the law, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for a judge to decide in another circumstance. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I must say this law is not a standalone law. It is not intended to be a magic bullet. It articulates with a wide range of processes and laws that we have purchased as a government for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Just today, the honourable members will take notice that we amended the civil proceedings rules, the criminal proceedings rules again, and the maintenance rules. The rules allow for processes to happen. It is this government, under this Prime Minister, that recognized that this Parliament, upon its vacation, as is imminent, that this Parliament will be repurposed for the civil courts of Trinidad and Tobago, leaving the Hall of Justice to be amplified away from 10 courts for the criminal matters to 31 full courts and 34 chambers. This government, under this Prime Minister, will have the ability to have 65 functional spaces for criminal matters. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to be bold to say that the last time this form of amendment of process and of capacity was seen was in the early 1980s when the Hall of Justice was opened. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, it makes brilliant sense of having achieved the renovations of the Red House, having moved the Attorney General's office out of Cabildo, repurposed that building for the purposes of the Parliament, allowing the criminal courts to now expand into the criminal division, which we brought as a government, allowing for the expansion of the judiciary, which we brought as a government, moving the judiciary from 32 judges in numerical capacity up to 64, from 12 justices of appeal up to 15, in allowing for the expansion of the courts as our cabinet is continuing to consider that exercise. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this bill is connected to the process reform, to the capacity reform. It works alongside the anti-gang legislation. Very importantly, it works alongside the anti-bail provisions. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I note for the record, and I congratulate the police and the judiciary, that 3 persons were recently arrested under the anti-gang law and had previous offenses, charges, and have been denied bail. This law is already in effect, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This law, this bill, is intended to allow the people of Trinidad and Tobago a fighting chance. It is not just the replication that we saw in previous governments, in particular, that which occupied office in the period 2010 to 2015, where we tick the box on laws.
2 more minutes.
And instead of operationalizing the laws by the creation of courts, by the creation of capacity, by the creation of bodies, instead of doing that, we focused only on numerical equivalent of laws. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the weeks ahead, as we unveil what has already been implemented and purchased for the people of Trinidad and Tobago in the context of law and order, we are confident that this country is finally headed into the right direction because processes had to be implemented and capacity had to be built at the same time that we were dealing with the legislative improvement. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I look forward to the debate. I welcome comments that will come from my learned colleagues opposite and on this bench, and I beg to move.
Honourable members, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Firearms Act, Chapter 1601, be now read a second time. I recognize the member for Naparima.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Listening to the Attorney General this afternoon, one would get the impression that in Trinidad and Tobago, everything is hunky-dory, that we have no murders, that crime is down, that our prisons are not overcrowded, and gangs do not control our territory. Everything is working well. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to say from the onset that while we will support this bill, this is the Firearms Amendment Bill 2019, we have the view that once again we have been summoned to debate a bill which by any stretch of the imagination cannot be described as the most important instrument that will have a measurable impact on improving our lives, or advancing our democracy, or taking us inexorably on a path to first world status, or dealing decisively, manifestly, and measurably with the task of reducing crime. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is all a charade to give the impression that this government is tough on crime when they fully well know that they cannot tell us with a straight face how this bill will measurably reduce crime and in what time frame. They cannot do this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because in order to be effective, you have to find the guns and those using the guns to commit crime. So, Deputy Speaker, our crime detection rate is under 30%. We were told by the Honorable Attorney General this afternoon that for 2019, the detection rate is 28%. If we take out from this figure those criminals who commit crimes of passion and who subsequently hang themselves or give themselves up, and if we subtract those foolish enough to do such thing as driving the vehicle of the person they murdered, then the real detection rate is under 20%. So this bill will have no measurable impact on 80% of gun-related offenses. Guns will continue to arrive from South America and Venezuela through our porous borders, and guns will continue to be the weapons of choice for most serious crimes. And no one knows how many guns there are in Trinidad. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are in uncharted territory. But worse, why, we ask, on the eve of local government elections and general elections, are we not debating campaign finance reform? Why are we not taking steps to fully implement the procurement legislation that would prevent the nonsense that is taking place with successor companies of Petrotrin and the travesty of the infamous contract to build a number of homes at a cost of $485 million?
Standing Order 48-1, please.
Overruled.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Why are we not debating the complete abolition of the archaic, antediluvian, abhorrent, and repressive Sedition Act? Those are the things that are important to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. In the explanatory note of this bill, we are informed inter alia that the purpose of the Firearms Amendment Bill 2019 is to create the offense of trafficking in firearms or prohibited weapons, and most importantly, to increase the penalties throughout the Act, and in some instances to provide increased penalties for first, second, and third offenses. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in clauses 5, in clause 6, in clause 7, in clauses 13A, B, C, and D, in clause 14, in clause 19, and 23A and B. In all these clauses, we see maximum penalties which specify on indict, and I quote, on indictment for a third or any subsequent offense to imprisonment for life. And to make sure that judges have no discretion, we read in clause 2A that life means the natural life of a person. I'm quoting here. We see, for example, for not having a firearm user's license and possessing guns or ammunition, on summary conviction for a first offense, one is subject, quote, to a fine of $500,000 and imprisonment for 15 years. These increases in penalties will, for most poor inner-city youth, lead to lengthy terms of imprisonment, especially where little discretion, it appears, is given to magistrates and judges. I ask the question, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what if a grandmother happened to have a wayward relative who hid a gun at her home and the gun is discovered by the police? What happens if one placed a gun together with a white powdery substance near one's water tank? Mr. Deputy Speaker, this bill is based on the premise that our crime will somehow, by magic, be resolved by locking up more and more of our inner city males for longer and longer periods and literally throwing away the key. Out of sight, Mr. Deputy Speaker, out of mind. Government by abandonment. A government utterly disconnected from the children of its voter bank. Where, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the judicious balance between more and more draconian laws and well-conceived socio-cultural and economic efforts to reduce the allure of guns, gold, bling?
Speaker 53(1)E, please. My members being listed.
Again, Mr. AG, again, please have your discourse with your team at hushed tones, please. Proceed.
May I read Standing Order 46.6, please? 48.6, forgive me. This 4 and 6, the improper motive that my learned friend is raising, it causes me deep distress, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Perhaps you may wish to reflect on what the honourable member has said.
Proceed.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I will repeat, out of sight, out of mind. Government by abandonment. A government utterly disconnected from the children of its voter bank. I will say it here, and I will say it again.
And I rise while you're considering on 48, 4 and 6, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This kind of whistleblowing
Mr. Deputy Speaker, dog whistle blowing, dog whistling.
Members, members, please. Chief Whip, you refer to 53(1). Right. Again, members, according to Standing Order 53, while the member is speaking, we're supposed to have silence. Again, AG and your team, the running commentary, that could create a disturbance to the member for Naprima while he's speaking. And with regards to 48, 4 and 6, all right, I overrule. And again, member, I'll give you some latitude, continue, and I'll be able to rule later on. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Before I rule, and again, address the chair. Right? Address the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It seems as if some people in here cannot take the truth, cannot take the fact. They cannot take the fact that not everybody will be silenced by their bullying, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, soon, and I'm speaking specifically to the draconian legislation and the fact that penalties have been increased significantly, which would lead to what could be described as mass incarceration. I'm speaking of the impact of this legislation on our prison services. Mr. Deputy Speaker, soon, if this government has its way, we will soon have the largest prison population in the world. According to the World Prison Brief, Trinidad and Tobago, with 292 persons incarcerated per 100,000 citizens, ranks embarrassingly high at 37th in the world among 222 countries and dependencies with the largest prison populations. That is where we are today, at number 37th in terms of world prison populations. Compare the high ranking with the embarrassingly low position of 105 among 190 economies in terms of the ease of doing business, according to the World Bank annual ratings. So when it comes to the bad things like prison population, we are way up there. And when it comes to the good things like the ease of doing business, we are very low in global rankings. That is the kind of thing, when I talk about misplaced priorities, this is an example. So, Deputy Speaker, the United States has the world's largest prison populations with 655 persons per 100,000. Countries with fewer prison populations than Trinidad and Tobago include Dominica, 289, Martinique, 217 per 100,000, Singapore, 199, Venezuela, 178, Jamaica, which has similar socio-cultural and characteristics like Trinidad and Tobago. Jamaica only has 138 persons incarcerated per 100,000. We have double that, more than double that. Norway, 63, and I'll speak to Norway later, and India, 33 per 100,000. Mr. Deputy Speaker, while we are frantically passing a suite of not well thought out laws to jail more and more of our young people, the United States, Norway, Germany, and others who are more enlightened are doing exactly the opposite. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in Germany, given their experiences with the Holocaust, they treat prisoners as human beings. We lock them up. And we, if possible, we lock them up for life. And if we have the authority, we lock them up for the remainder of their natural life. Mr. Deputy Speaker, US President Trump has signed recently legislation that trim mandatory minimum sentences and expand credit for inmates who participate in programs meant to prepare them for life after prison. Let me repeat that. The US President Trump has recently signed legislation that would trim minimum sentences and expand credit for inmates who participate in programs meant to prepare them for life after prison. If President Trump, who some describe as racist, is actively taking steps to reduce the mass incarceration of mainly black Americans, how can we describe the actions of this PNM administration as evidenced by this bill that is before us? The Deputy Speaker, federal inmates in the United States, and I'm just showing you the difference. We enter lockup, and we have a hierarchy of laws and a hierarchy of penalties, ending up with life, the rest of your natural life. Federal inmates in the United States who participate in, and I quote here, evidence-based recidivism reduction programs. Let me read that again. Evidence-based recidivism reduction programs. These are programs to reduce prisoners returning into prison after they have been released. Would earn credits to leave prison more quickly, and sentence reforms would trim future mandatory minimum sentences for drug crimes and let prisoners sentenced under the old crack cocaine rules petition for reduced sentences. So we're talking in the States about reduced sentences, and we're talking in Trinidad, and we're talking here today about increased sentences and increased penalties. That is the disconnect between best practices globally and what we are doing in this Parliament and in Trinidad and Tobago. So while the United States and other enlightened jurisdictions are taking steps to reduce prison populations and recidivism rates, this PNM administration is hell-bent on bringing to Parliament a suite of legislation to increase fines and deny bail and, in effect, lock up more and more of our citizens. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'll make the point. We are here like robots coming to Parliament ever so often. Every 5 years, every 9 years or so. We came in 2011, and we are here in 2019. So we come ever so often to increase penalties, unthinkingly doing the same thing over and over. It is as if we are operating no brains. So in 2011, we increased it from whatever it was to $100,000. We come here today to increase it from $100,000, and I hear the figures are not specific. I'll get to that later. 100,000 to 500,000. And in the next 5 years, we'll come again, repeating the same exercise robotically. And I'll talk about that a little later. In 2011, we did exactly what we are doing today. That is increasing penalties in respect of the existing Firearms Act. The Firearms Amendment Act of 2011, in Clause 7, reads as follows. This is the 2011 Act. It says, and I quote, Section 8 of the Act is amended by deleting the words 25 and 5 and substituting the words 40 and 8 respectively. That is what they did, our predecessors did in 2011. They came and they amended the bill by deleting and adding. Today, 8 years later, 8 years later, we are dragged here to amend the same Section 8 as follows, and I quote, Section 8 of the Act is amended by deleting A, the word A, 40, and substituting the words 250, and B, 8, and substituting the word 10. I suspect, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in 2025 or thereabouts, if the country loses its brain and elects the incompetent members across the floor, we will be here again to increase the draconian and punitive measures in the vain hope that they will serve as deterrents to crime. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the late Lloyd Best, my guru, used to say ad infinitum that the problem with our P&M leadership is that they think arithmetically and they do not think in terms of I do not apply the principles of trigonometry or algebra and calculus. Thank you very much. I know that those on the other sides operate arithmetically when they call us in large part merely to increase the penalties of various firearm offenses to... Mr. Deputy Speaker, I seek your protection. The noise is over here.
Again, please, members, once you address the chair, I think we'll be able to minimize, that thing. You were just in discourse. You were just in discourse. But again, members, AG and your team, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I know that those on the other side are operating arithmetically when they call us in large part merely to increase the penalties of various firearm offenses to accommodate inflationary factors. How much did it cost to bring us here today? Gasoline, meals, parliamentary staff, security, 300, 400,000? Did it ever occur to those on the other side that all that is required in the circumstances is to add a formula to the bill, possibly in the form of accompanying regulations, that would, at the discretion of the Minister of National Security, whoever he may be, and subject to negative resolution of Parliament, increase the penalties in line with inflationary realities as specified by the National Statistical Institute. This could be done at predetermined individuals, as is done with increases in gasoline prices at gas stations. We do not have to be called out to Parliament to debate every time petroleum prices are changed at the pump. It is routine, and what we are doing here today is routine stuff. And routine stuff, I am told by my mathematically inclined colleagues, are subject to
Again, members on the government side, again, hush tones or silence, please. I'm getting a distraction. Proceed, Naprima.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am told that routine actions are subject to algorithmic solutions. Right? Mr. Deputy Speaker, this brings me to another of my concerns regarding this bill. And it is that the data does not show definitively that increasing penalties for gun-related offenses will lead to measurable reductions in gun crimes. I want to repeat that. My concern is that the data does not show definitively that increasing penalties for gun-related offenses will lead to measurable reductions in gun crimes. The Honorable Attorney General provided statistics in the Senate, and he did today, which showed an increase in gun-related crimes over the last decade. What he did not demonstrate was how the 2011 increases as specified in the Act, the Firearms Amendment Act 2011. What he did not demonstrate was how the increases as specified in the Act led to measurable reductions in gun-related crimes, which would justify the increases in this bill. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, how did he come up with these new fines? Or the increased incarceration figures? Did he use inflation? Did he dream them up as when we play Wewe and we dream, I'm told that 10 is monkey and 36 is donkey? Well, I don't know if it was related to dreams. Or were they conjured up by VAPs? We need an explanation. I have to justify why you increase it from this to 500,000. And you could give us the inflationary factors and justify it. So the same level of deterrence that existed in 2011 would exist today. Instead, in the Senate, he provided data which were not properly disaggregated to support the argument. Instead, he spoke about increases in gun-related offenses. He confessed, and this is in Hansard 24th of June 2019, page 130. I quote, "We are noticing certainly that there's a prevalence now of firearms actually found and seized of hundreds of high-powered weapons on the streets." End of quote. Later down, on page 131, speaking in the Senate about firearm-related offenses, confesses that there were 1,059 firearm offenses in 2015, 1,185 in 2016, 1,600 in 2017, and 1,552 in 2018. And he went on to say, and I quote, "And that, Mr. Vice President, demonstrates that reports of firearm-related offenses are on the ascendancy." What he failed to demonstrate was that these increases in firearm-related offenses occurred because the fines were too low. It appears, therefore, that guns abound, unmindful of the legislative sanctions. In respect of gang-related murders using firearms, the Honorable Attorney General told the Senate that there were 1,679 reported firearm-related murders for the 4-year period up to June 2019. And in the 4-year period up to June 2019, it is estimated that there were 639 related murders, again centered on firearms. Where is the empirical evidence that passage of more and more laws, as was done in 2011, resulted in significant and measurable decreases in firearm-related offenses? You see, you can bring data that is global and justify anything. You could say, crime is on the increase, and therefore we need to pass any law related to crime. What is required is for you to show the data, to show empirically that if we pass this law, it measurably will reduce gun-related crimes by 10% in 2 years. If that is done, we have no argument. We have to support it, as we will be supporting this bill. But we have to hope that they know what they're doing, and that when they say pass this legislation, it will solve crime. We know it will not. And I can tell you, we can come here for the next 6 months, and we can look to see whether the crime has been reduced. And I think I know what the answer would be. Mr. Deputy Speaker, if draconian measures in our context were ever to lead to a decrease in murders, then we would expect that hanging, which is the most draconian of all punitive measures, would lead to significant reductions in our murder rates. We would expect that hanging would lead to reduction in the murder rates. But this is not so. And one could say, like murder, like one gets the impression like they're afraid to die. The fact that we have hanging in Trinidad and Tobago does not factor into the decision-making of young criminals. Yesterday, I heard the Democratic presidential hopeful, Kamala Harris, saying on MSNBC that the death penalty is not, given her experience, it is not a disincentive to criminals. She also said that passing of harsher and harsher laws does not serve the needs to reduce crime in the United States. And she should know, since among other things, she was the 32nd Attorney General of the state of California from 2011 to 2017. And she is saying that what we are doing here today will not measurably reduce crime. And again, we ask, where is the empirical evidence to prove the passage of more and more draconian laws will lead to measurable reductions in crime? So when we read in Clause 5, that Section 9, which deals with offenses relating to selling or transferring firearms or ammunition of the Act, is amended, And it states in subsection 1, by repealing paragraphs A and B and substituting the following: on summary conviction, on summary conviction for first offense, to a fine of 500,000 and imprisonment for 10 years. Or B, on conviction on indictment for first offense, to imprisonment for 20 years. Or C, on conviction for indictment for a second offense, to imprisonment for 25 years. And D, on conviction on indictment for a third or any subsequent offense, to imprisonment for life. Mr. Deputy Speaker, if death by hanging is not, and in our context has never been, a deterrent to criminals, as evidenced by ever-increasing annual murder rates, especially under this PNM administration, why would the less draconian imprisonment for life be different? Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are informed by the mighty Stalin that sufferers, and there are many under this PNM, sufferers do not care about country. Sufferers do not care about tongue. Sufferers only care about where the next meal coming from. In other words, sufferers think short-term horizons, and they think with immediacy. I suspect, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that many inner-city youth who see their brothers and sisters dying daily, and who, I'm told, do not expect to live beyond 30 years, will not be able to process the difference between 20 years in prison or 25 years or life in prison. Like sufferers, they are concerned with what is in front of them and surviving on a day-to-day basis. They know, and this is why in passing legislation, we don't sit in an ivory tower and legislate for the citizenry. We put ourselves in the minds of the citizens and say, how would this law affect them? Would it act as a deterrent, or would it be totally ignored?
Your initial 30 minutes has expired. You have an additional 15. Do you care to avail yourself?
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy.
Proceed.
If today a gang leader tells an inner city youth, at-risk youth, that he must kill, and if he does not obey, he will be killed, with that mindset, 20 years in prison is a moot point for him. So, Deputy Speaker, it is important for us to look at the historical context of this Parliament and its previous iterations. We note that whether it is the anti-gang legislation, the Bail Amendment Bill 2019, or this bill to amend the Firearms Act, one detects an uncomfortable or disconcerting emphasis on punishment as opposed to crime prevention and rehabilitation. And I don't want anyone to say that I am saying we should be soft on criminals. I am saying that we should balance it. We should have a nuanced approach that equally punitive, but also at the same time stops the treadmill of poor inner city youth heading to the prisons. Punishment, Mr. Deputy Speaker, was the methodology of control used by our colonial powers. We see it in the Sedition Act, and we witness it in the predecessor Legislative Council, the LegCo. And we ask, where is the post-colonial frame of reference, given that we are now dealing not with subjects out there, but we are dealing with our equals, who may be suffering through no fault of their own, through accident of birth, through deficiency of upbringing, through inadequacy of parental guidance, or the vagaries of persistent poverty. And I say that if we were to put ourselves in the mindset of the poor, and if we did not have parents and a community and teachers who cared for us and guide us, there but for the grace of God would be all of us in this Parliament. We are fortunate, and because we are fortunate, there's a responsibility on us not to jail, not to lock up, not to throw away the key because we are putting them away for the rest of their natural life, but to equally balance it with a concern to stop the pipeline. Harding Burnley, slave master of Trinidad and Tobago, in 1825, in a former iteration of this House, insisted, and you see the same mentality, the same frame of mind. He insisted that the planter, and I quote here from the book, page 27, written by Selwyn Kojo. He insisted that the planter needed to exercise their domestic jurisdiction. He was saying that in a parliament, in a legislative council, just like we are here today. And I suspect 100 years from now, people will be saying, but how come a PNM administration could only have thought in terms of lockup and jail for life when they had experiences like Norway and Germany and the United States to tell us that this is not the best way forward? He insisted that the planter needed to exercise their domestic jurisdiction by which a master is authorized to punish a slave without the intervention of the magistrate. He argued that women should also be flogged. The only question is whether it should be done decently, and by that he meant with their clothes on or with their clothes off. That is the level of the mindset of pure punishment. He said the power is essential to the system, Burnley opined in the Legislative Council. So 200 years ago, they discussed the power of the whip, where our great-great-great-grandmothers were to be flogged. And today, in a successor parliament, we are debating jailing for life of the great-great-great-grandchildren of those slaves. We have not moved forward, and we will not move forward under this PNM administration.
8, 4, and 6. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that has crossed the line, surely. This law is not geared against black people. To categorize this law as only against the children of slaves.
Member, please. Members. Thank you, members. Honorable member for Naparima, I would like you to withdraw, retract, and say it, however, differently for me, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It would seem...
Yes, sir, 1 second. All members, again, Honorable Prime Minister, please, you will have the opportunity to enter the debate as soon as possible. Member for Naparima.
Yes, thank you. You asked me to rephrase. Withdraw.
I would like, members, please, I would like you to withdraw, retract, and say differently, or you can move on after you would have done it.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It would seem that I withdraw and retract.
And then go again.
And Mr. Deputy Speaker, all I wish to say...
Wait 1 second. Listen, member, listen. I have given you the opportunity to withdraw, retract accordingly, and move on. There's no need to explain to me, as the case may be. All right? Because again, I have upheld the standing order as raised by the AG, so proceed accordingly.
Mr. Speaker.
But make the statement. I still need to hear.
I retract and withdraw. I withdraw and retract. Another concern is the rate at which illegal firearms are appearing on our streets is something to be concerned about. Before we think about discussing this legislation, we must have a plan to stop or significantly reduce the entry.
Member, listen. Member for Laventille West and member for Couva South. If you all need to have a discourse, you all are free to exit the chamber accordingly. Other than that, I will give you all the opportunity to enter the debate as soon as you all catch my eyes. Fair enough? Right now, it's Naparima turn. Kindly proceed.
What is the fear? We are discussing rationally, and yet there is the noise and the persistent rumors. We are saying that we need to, before we think about this legislation, we need to develop a plan on how to stop or significantly reduce the entry of illegal firearms into our country. The Newsday, February 21st, 2019, reported, quote, some 8,154 illegal firearms are circulating in Trinidad and Tobago, according to estimates by the Strategic Services Agency. So there is a plethora of arms.
Laventille West and Couva South. Next time I have to stand and to converse with the both of you all, I'll ask you all to exit the chamber. Laventille West, Couva South. Proceed.
The Trinidad Guardian reported on August 12, 2019 that 8 persons were arrested at a birthday party in Diego Martin after police seized 2 firearms and a quantity of ammunition hidden in a cooler. And I could read hundreds of examples I have here. With the amount of illegal firearms entering the country through legitimate and illegitimate ports, it acts as a reminder of how our unguarded borders are and the ease of access to gain firearms. Should we not be directing our attention to reducing the inflow of guns rather than incarcerating low-level gun operatives? On July 21st, 2019, Loop TT News indicated 5 high-powered firearms and a cache of ammunition were discovered along the Caracas Beach by Southwestern Division Task Force. This type of high-powered weaponry we have entering the country. Almost every serious violent crime and the vast majority of murders are committed using illegal weapons. So before we start to discuss and implement this piece of legislation, we need to fix existing problems. Our first step should be aimed at reducing and eventually eliminating the number of illegal firearms entering the country. And to do so, we need to be more protected and guarded. The second concern I have is, why is there such an emphasis on longer sentences and life sentences? Instead, the focus should be on prison reform and prison rehabilitation. There are significant costs to keeping persons locked up. Instead, we should be putting effective systems and opportunities in place to steer prisoners onto paths that reintegrate them into civil society, especially with many of our youth being charged for possession of guns and ammunition. And the question we ask, who pays for the cost of mass incarceration? What are the hidden costs to societies of fathers in prison for life with children growing up fatherless? What are the hidden costs of an incarcerated person for life? Yesterday on MSNBC there was this program.
4810, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Overruled.
It was said on MSNBC that the worst thing you could do is imprison someone for life because he has no incentive to behave himself in prison. None of the programs to disincentivize criminal activity in prisons he would listen to, because he knows that whatever he does, he is in prison for life. And furthermore, we feel that by imprisoning persons, we are reducing crimes. Hits are called from our prisons. So when we put them for life, it does not necessarily mean that there's going to be a reduction. Our focus should be geared towards aftercare rather than life sentences, since youth are the highest risk for convicted gun and gun-related activities. An article published in the US-based website, The Conversation, on June 15,
4410.
Mr. AG, with 4 minutes to go in the members' discourse. Members, please, please, please. I would overrule that this time.
It said that rehabilitation is a smarter approach rather than locking up people for extended periods. It said, and I quote, "Increasing prison sentences does little to deter criminal behavior. Longer sentences are associated with higher rates of reoffending. When prisoners return to their communities, as the vast majority inevitably do, the problems multiply." Mr. Deputy Speaker, we will support this legislation. You know why? You know why, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Because they hope, given their incompetence and their inability to deal with crime, with bringing a suite of legislation that will have no effect, that they would be in a position to blame us on this side. So we are showing them. We are showing them that they're incapable of solving crime. They cannot with a straight face tell us that this legislation will measurably reduce crime. We're giving them the chance to show the country that they're incompetent, that they cannot perform. It's only old talk and zessing. And you cannot run a country by old talk. At some stage, you have to come to the country and say the murder rate is down by 10% annually. If you cannot do that, then demit office, call election, and let us turn to the loving embrace of the United National Congress under the leadership of Kamala Persad-Bissessar. Let us return, and I want to tell Trinidad there is hope for Trinidad and Tobago. Do not dismay, as the Bible says. In my Father's house there are many mansions, and if it were not so, I would have told you. Let us return to the good old days of the United National Congress. I thank you.
I recognize the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I start my contribution by respectfully, through you, reminding the population who are looking on exactly what this debate is about. This debate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is a debate about amending the firearms legislation. And there is not a single sane person, right-thinking person, or civic-minded citizen of Trinidad and Tobago who would support the proposition that there is not a problem with crime related to the use of illegal firearms in Trinidad and Tobago. So we start with that. The second thing I'd like to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is as a member of Parliament for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, which is an area that the member for Naparima, on a number of occasions, when reading his pre-prepared speech, referred to inner city youth and the racial dog whistles that were taking place from the member of Naparima, referring to my constituents as descendants and members of the slave population. We reject all the racial dog whistling taking place. And before getting into the meat of the debate, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Carney East, again, Carney East, you will be given the opportunity to enter the debate. Fine? No need to comment. No, member, no need to comment. Hold on. No need to comment. You will have the opportunity to enter the debate. Proceed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker. And you see, Mr. Deputy Speaker, thankfully the population of Trinidad and Tobago doesn't have a short memory. And thankfully the population of Trinidad and Tobago looked on very carefully at what happened last week, at the start of the week, when on that same screaming UNC platform, they introduced, in the most naked of forms, race into the conversation taking place.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, 48-1.
Excuse me, members, overrule, proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You see, there was a lot of screaming and shouting taking place about not wanting to confront the truth. But the population will decide what is the truth. And I'm marking the ground here, unfortunately, on the 9th of the 9th in 2019, in this August House, that once again, the first speaker from the opposition saw it fit to blow the dog whistle following the leader of the opposition last week on our UNC platform, blowing the racial dog whistle. Having said that, to remind the population what we're here to deal with today, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise on 48-4 and 6. You mentioned the leader of the opposition race on the platform.
Yes. Members, please. Members.
Not the place and to go on the platform. How did he got proper motivation?
Yes.
Member, please. Members, honorable members, you all are bringing the Deputy Speaker into the debate on too many occasions. I have made the necessary jottings accordingly, and when you raise on the particular standing order, I will so rule. No one will go against what I have said here today. All right? Overruled, proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, on a weekly basis, as the Minister of National Security, I meet with the heads of our security services. One of the persons that attends on a weekly basis is the Commissioner of Police, Mr. Gary Griffith. And one of the presentations that we look at on a weekly basis are, in fact, the statistics driven by data and also by intelligence when deciding how to tackle the incidents of crime. And as at last week Friday, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the 6th of September 2019, unfortunately, the murder toll in Trinidad and Tobago for 2019 rested at 366 murders too many. And out of those 366 murders that were recorded as at the 6th of September 2019, 297 of the murders were committed via the use of illegal firearms. So to repeat the point, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as at the 6th of September 2019 in Trinidad and Tobago, of 366 recorded murders, 297 were committed using illegal firearms. Therefore, firearms were used to commit 81% of the murders to date as at last week Friday. And it is the responsibility of us, the legislators, to determine what can we do. What are the steps that we can take in passing legislation? Because that is the power we have. The power we have sitting here as the 41 members, elected members of the House of Representatives, is to come here to debate and to pass legislation aimed at making Trinidad and Tobago a better place. And today, the legislation that we're here to debate is legislation aimed at the phenomenon of illegal firearms. And I will get to the concept of shooters, to use the layman's language, and the concept of persons who are repeat offenders using illegal firearms, and the havoc that they're wreaking on our society here today, and why we as legislators, all 41 of us here, have a responsibility to do what we can through the passage of law. And I accept there is no one single act, not a single act that can be done by anyone that would eradicate crime or bring crime in a downward spiral the way any civic-minded citizen would like. But the power we have as elected members of Parliament, each and every one of us, is to pass legislation that may assist those who are charged with the responsibility of tackling the scourge of crime. And I start at the outset by saying this legislation here today is as a result of consultation with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and our intelligence agencies. And they are the ones who sat with us and said, this will have a deterrent effect on crime. So all of the screaming and the shouting and all of the suggestions as to incarcerating persons, etc., have no merit. Because you see, I struggle to understand what was being suggested. We are faced with 297 murders as at last week Friday being committed by the use of illegal firearms. Over 80% of the murders in Trinidad being committed by the use of illegal firearms. And surely it cannot be suggested by anyone in this House or any right-thinking or civic-minded citizen of Trinidad and Tobago that it is better to have persons utilizing, using, walking around, carrying illegal firearms out there than incarcerated and off of the streets. That cannot be the suggestion. And if that is the suggestion, we reject it outright. You see, let's start with the concept of a firearm, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The single and sole purpose of a firearm is to kill someone. There is no other purpose of a firearm other than to kill someone. So if you accept that the purpose of a firearm, and I'm hearing the member for Siparia saying to injure someone. So if you accept that the purpose of this firearm is to injure or murder someone, to kill someone, you need to address it. And I'd also add very quickly that the examples being utilized of the United Kingdom, Norway, and Germany are the most ridiculous concepts I've heard in a long time. For the single reason that those jurisdictions do not face the scourge of the use of illegal firearms. Anyone who has traveled to the United Kingdom would understand immediately. And I remember when I was sent off to school there many moons ago, being surprised that the police officers did not even carry firearms. And you know why? Because in the United Kingdom, there is not the availability of illegal firearms. There are specialist firearm units in the United Kingdom where only specialized officers who are trained to use firearms carry firearms. Not so in Trinidad and Tobago. Down to our municipal police, unfortunately, have to be armed with firearms. And you know why, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Because of the risk that they face. And the availability of illegal firearms now, unfortunately, in Trinidad and Tobago, is the reality of the situation. And I am not here today to say how the firearms came in during what periods of time, because the reality of what we're dealing with here today and what we have to address today is what are we going to do about it. And when I use the word we, it is the collective we, the 41 of us here, elected from Tobago to Trinidad, to deal with the scourge of the use of illegal firearms. And I want to use some statistics, if you would permit me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to carry home the point and to let persons know exactly what we're facing in Trinidad and Tobago and the reality of the scourge of illegal firearms. And to sit here rather, and to listen to those screaming, tell us about statistics, tell us about comparatives. The truth is that the law enforcement officers, and I applaud them today, going out there on a daily basis, night and day, taking the risk, putting their lives at risk to keep us safe. We are focused. And I use the collective we because I want to stand with the law enforcement officers in tackling crime. They are focused on taking illegal firearms off the streets. But in no jurisdiction is that an easy one. And just to finish the point, in Norway, there is no availability of illegal firearms. The same thing in Germany. They simply do not face, those jurisdictions do not face the use of illegal firearms by the criminal element. The normal citizen walking on the streets in those three countries are not at risk of being hurt by the use of illegal firearms. So let's get to reality. The monthly comparative of firearms found and seized from January 1st to August 31st in 2018-2019, I wouldn't get into the monthly. What I will say is, at the end of August 31st, 2019, police had seized 549 illegal firearms, compared to 691 last year. And I pause on this point to drive home the types of illegal firearms being used. Because as I stood in the other chamber, the other place, I made the point that no longer is it old revolvers or homemade shotguns being utilized by the criminal element out there. And God forbid any of us in here face or stare down the barrel of what the criminal element has out there. The average firearm, handgun, being used by every criminal out there is a Glock. A very sophisticated weapon that never jams. Every Glock can carry, well, the Glocks that they're using can carry 15 plus 1, 16 rounds. But what we're seeing is the use of extended magazines, carrying up to 33 rounds. A simple variance of a Glock can turn it into an automatic from a semi-automatic handgun. This is what we, the citizens, are facing. So to stand here and say that the only reason this bill is being supported is because you want to see the government fail. Is very, right? Is you want to see incompetence and you want to see not performing and you want to see failure. That is not a reason. The reason we must support the legislation is because the reality that our citizens are facing is the criminal element has access to the most sophisticated types of firearms. The two speakers before me spoke about the use of semi-automatic and assault rifles. AR-15s. AR-15s don't come from Venezuela. Glocks don't come from Venezuela. So all of the old talk and the narrative and the continued propaganda that this is a problem from Venezuela, it is not. Before coming here a short while ago, I had a meeting with the deputy commander of US SOUTCOM, Lieutenant General Flynn. And one of the things we discussed was the assistance in fighting the trafficking of illegal arms. Yesterday, I was privileged enough, due to the post that I currently hold, to accompany the Chief of Defense Staff of Trinidad and Tobago and 119 of our Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force officers to Nassau, Bahamas. And when I met with the Minister of National Security there and his Chief of Defense Staff, a big part of my conversation with the Chief of Defense Staff of Bahamas is he explained to me it's 100,000 miles in the archipelago that they have to patrol, and it is impossible once you're an island to secure your borders. And they discussed the proliferation of illegal firearms. So the illegal firearms, the AR-15s and the Glock, I want to tell everybody here, come from North America. They don't come from Venezuela. Yes, the AK-47s and other firearms do. But this false narrative being spewed out there that it is only from South America is false. So we need to tackle it. And the concept of a shooter. There was a recent incident where a criminal element was terminated, was murdered by another criminal element right there in the West at a KFC outlet. And you know what information was brought to me afterwards, Mr. Deputy Speaker? He was under investigation for 47 murders. 47 murders with the use of illegal firearms. Because you see, you can either have a legal firearm, you're licensed by the Commissioner of Police, or illegal. And all of the criminal element. Well, let me retract that. Because it depends on how you define the criminal element. A lot of the criminal element are carrying illegal firearms. So that is what this legislation is here today about. And one of the greatest deterrents, as has been told to us by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, is to increase the fines. And is also to take away the fines and increase the sentences. So again, this false narrative about incarcerating en masse, I want to put it to the population this way. The only people who stand risk of being incarcerated under this legislation are those who are carrying illegal firearms. And the whole conversation about incarcerating someone potentially for the full course of their natural life, it is only if they are convicted for the third time with an illegal firearm. So let the population understand that a person who is convicted once for an illegal firearm, convicted twice for an illegal firearm, and then caught and convicted a third time for an illegal firearm can only be a repeat offender, can only be a person who is a criminal element carrying around an illegal firearm to kill people. And therefore, it makes abundant sense to send a signal to those types of people, not confined by race whatsoever. At least we on this side don't see it that way. We on this side, when preparing law and when carrying out our duties, I can say without fear of contradiction, do not see race. We see right and we see wrong. You don't hear us on platforms or in Parliament talking about persons by their race. I take umbrage to that as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. And the legislation we're here debating today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is to deal with the criminal element. And the only one who stands the risk of being incarcerated for the rest of his or her natural life is a criminal who for the third time has been convicted by a competent court of being found in possession of an illegal firearm. And what is wrong with that? Is that a person we want out amongst us in society? You're caught once and convicted. You're caught twice and convicted. The third time you're caught and convicted. Yes, stay in prison. I stand by that. And I think that is the right legislation for Trinidad at this time. You see, in the same statistics used by the Commissioner of Police, we deal with murders, we deal with shootings and woundings, and we deal with illegal firearms found and seized. And I want the people of Trinidad and Tobago to understand what we've done for this year up to the 6th of September, from the 1st of January to the 6th of September 2019. 557 illegal firearms seized. 7,309 rounds of ammunition seized for this year. Last year, at this time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, 12,776 illegal rounds of ammunition. That is enough for a small militia, enough for a small army. So that is what this legislation is targeting here today. And there is nothing wrong with that. And I strongly suggest, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the sentences we're proposing, which only are invoked upon conviction, are proportionate. They're proportionate today to deal with what it is we have to deal with. You see, my friends from Couva South and Couva North recently had to face something in their constituency with fishermen. And you ask the families of those fishermen, and the same fishermen that you want to protect and that you want us to protect, us meaning the state, it is illegal firearms. They didn't jump off or be thrown off their vessels because the men said to do so. It is because the criminal element are utilizing illegal firearms. And that is what we're facing out there. So if we catch the criminals with the illegal firearms, let us throw the full brunt of the law. Yes, let them be lost in prison. There's nothing wrong with that because they have taken away our liberty. They have taken away your constituents' liberty, the ability to be able to walk the streets, to go out in their vessels, to do whatever it is they need to do on a legal basis. And that, my colleagues, is what we are being called upon here today to address. This is nothing to do about race. This is nothing to do about your side and our side. This is the responsibility each and every one of us here today as legislators have. The oath that we all took without fear or favor, without ill will or malice, to stand up for the law-abiding citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and to pass this legislation without the rhetoric. It is to stand up and do it without the rhetoric. Because, you know, at some stage, as politicians, we have to be rhetoric. We have to be responsible. And you have to step out of the old school, old talk, and pelt in mud and sling in mud, and step up to the plate to do what is right for Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to suggest today is that day. Today is that defining moment, because we all in here know what we're fighting with the illegal firearms out there. And the concept of shooters is real. The concept of the repeat offenders being held with firearms is real. I will breach confidentiality and say this here now in the Parliament to share amongst my colleagues. Within the last few weeks, dealing with a number of deportations, something struck me and it upset me at the heart and at the core, and I'm going to deal with the judiciary shortly. There were persons picked up with illegal firearms, illegal ammunition, and narcotics illegally. Those persons were taken to court. They pled guilty, so they didn't waste judicial time. They were held with illegal arms, ammunition, and drugs. Illegal. And you know what they did? What the magistrate did? You know what was the fine put on this person? these people $5,000 for the illegal narcotics and $7,500 for the illegal arms and ammunition. If you do that, colleagues, we cannot call upon the law enforcement officers out there who are putting their lives at risk morning, noon, and night to go and fight the criminal element. That is the signal that the judiciary is sending. And I don't buy this thing about sentencing guidelines, because at the end of the day, you know there's a discretion. And unless the judiciary joins with us in fighting crime, we're going to get nowhere. And the best we can do without trampling on the separation of powers, the best that we can do is what we're doing here today, colleagues. The best we can do, because this is not mandatory sentencing. But what we can do as legislators is send our signal to the judiciary here today that this is the area, this is the stratosphere of sentencing you should be looking at, because this is the reality of what we're dealing with. This, combined with the Bail Amendment Bill that you supported, that is now being utilized now as a Bail Amendment Act, is going to make a difference. And it is not right, I'll put it that way, to ask to see the statistics now, because the statistics come after the implementation of the law. So that's a facetious argument to make. It will come after, and you can... It is. And to giggle, and to smile, and to do whatever. Today, what we're being called upon is to step up for the people of Trinidad and Tobago and the law-abiding citizens who are faced with the barrels of the illegal firearms and the dangerous effects of the illegal firearms out there. Another statistic I'd like to put to the people of Trinidad and Tobago is we look at the breakdown of murders by motive. And right now, murders by motive fall into the following categories: unknown, gang-related, altercation, domestic violence, robbery, revenge, drug, and other. And as at the 6th of September, last week, Friday, out of the 366 murders, 123 were cleanly categorized as gang-related, 57 revenge, and 58 drugs. And I respectfully suggest that those three categories are the criminal gang element. And when you add it up, it's 230 out of 366 murders. So 63% of the murders are clearly gang-related in Trinidad and Tobago. And we need to send a strong signal to them, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Send a strong signal to the criminal element who are repeat offenders, who think it is okay for them to pick up the illegal firearms and go out there to commit their crimes. And a robbery turns into a murder, 45 of them for the year, because we know now that the criminal element has no value for life whatsoever. None. And this is the signal that we have to send to them, respectfully, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that if you want to take up an illegal firearm and take the risk and go outside there, we, the legislators in here, are telling the judiciary this is the level of sentencing we think should be applicable. And if you do it 3 times and you're convicted on the 3rd time, yes, spend the rest of your natural life. Because there is nothing that you are doing out there. You've had 2 previous opportunities to reform your life. And I also want to correct something. Because the prison service is being done a disservice in here when you hear the contribution of Naparima. The prison service has been working very, very hard at the reform and the rehabilitation. And in fact, you've been seeing it for the first time highlighted to the extent that it has been. You saw recently with their art exhibition, their reading, the various programs they're trying to push. Mr. Wayne Chance and his vision on a mission. All of these are the types of things we should be encouraging and we should be highlighting. Because he is right. We do need to provide restorative justice in the system and rehabilitation for reintegration. But today, this is not what this is about. Because today, the natural life is when you're found and convicted for the 3rd time with an illegal firearm. 3 strikes and you are out. you're in where you should be. And that is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government's position with respect to those who want to carry out a life of criminality and walk around with their illegal arms and ammunition. Serious crimes for 2019. Again, let the country understand what we're dealing with, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as at the 31st of August 2019, 364 murders, woundings with firearms and other weapons, and shooting with firearms, 468. And I pause here. For 2019, as at the 31st of August, woundings with firearms and other weapons and shootings with firearms, 468, compared to the year before, 529. The member for Naparima said at the end of his contribution, tell us about a drop in murders of 10%, and we will aim for it.
Honourable Member, your initial 30 minutes has expired. You have an additional 15 minutes, right? So we'll go till 4:30, and then we will conclude after we resume our tea.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'll actually try and wrap up. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want the population to listen carefully to this. What we have implemented in the last year has reduced the number of woundings with firearms and other weapons, shootings with firearms, by 11.5%, from 529 to 468. So do not stand here and chastise the law enforcement officers, the intelligence officers, the defense force officers who are working hard to reduce it, because they are reducing it. Let the population know we are heading in the right direction. Despite what Doppy and others may want to say, we are heading in the right direction. Possession of firearms and ammunition, serious crimes. I haven't identified who Doppy is. If somebody wants to claim the title Doppy, do it. Serious crimes. Serious crimes. Mr. Deputy Speaker. Possession of firearm and ammunition dropped by 26.5%. The possession of firearms and ammunition in the past year has dropped by 26.5%, from 913 to 671. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what I would like to say as well is that persons arrested and charged between the 1st of January to the 31st of August 2019 for murders, 39. Is it enough? No. Are we pushing harder to have more successful arrests and charges? Yes. But 154 persons were arrested and charged with wounding and shooting. Mr. Deputy Speaker, perhaps the most definitive statistic for this afternoon. For the year 2019 up to the 31st of August, 816 persons were arrested and charged with possession of firearm and ammunition. And those are the people that we're sending the signal to, that if you walk around with illegal arms and ammunition, we are increasing the sentencing for you. And that is, Doppy, you had your chance. You made a mess of it. You are a mess. You shouldn't be here.
Yes, please. Again, member. Again, Chief Whip. Chief Whip. Right. In terms of what's the concern?
Offensive language. The minister is using offensive language. My member. Who identifies as Doppy? You are Doppy.
Members, please. Members, please. Please. Again, Chief Whip, Leader of the House. All right? Again, don't bring the Speaker's chair into the concern of your personal concerns, please. So I need to be clear. Proceed.
And Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I wind up my contribution, I'd like to place on the Hansard and on the record that this legislation and the intent of this legislation is only to deal with the criminal element of society. And that is how we see it. This legislation is aimed and targeted specifically and surgically at that element of society who engage in criminality and want to walk around with illegal arms to harm people. Whatever race, whatever creed, whatever religious persuasion they may be, that is how we see the world on this side. And I take great offense to any suggestion otherwise and a categorization of jailing more and more young people from the inner city. That is not what this legislation is about. And he's still pursuing it. I also reject outright, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we reject outright on this side that the proposed fines and sentences are too high. Because what we're currently facing as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and what you're facing on a daily basis as you open your newspaper and you see another citizen slain, and quite a lot of them may be engaged in criminal activity, but by the use of illegal firearms, over 82% through the use of illegal firearms. The only power we have in here, colleagues, is to pass law. And to pass law that is always speaking and law that is directed at dealing with the scourges that society is feeling and having to deal with. And that is what we're here dealing with today. And lastly, there was a comment made that was the most offensive comment. And that hard, because there were a lot of offensive comments. But the most offensive, that the PNM administration could only think of locking up people and throwing away the key. I reject that outright. Those who should be locked out, that is the criminal element, will be locked up. Those who are to be locked up, who are the criminal element, this administration will do what we can to ensure that they're behind bars. Be it white-collar crime, be it the gang leaders, the persons who are engaging in gang activity. And despite all of the provocation by the member for Naparima, who comes here with the most disgusting of comments, because that is his nature. Having come from bowels, that is all that he can do. That is all that he can do. With those few words, I shine the spotlight on the member for Naparima. Let the population look at the member for Naparima and see who he is, what he is, and how he has become what he is. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, we on this side ask that this legislation be passed today to fight the scourge of illegal firearms.
Well said.
Member for Naparima, again, you were not on the floor to debate. I'd just like you to retract the statement that you made shortly. Yeah, the disgusting,
that's that
last statement. You were not part of it.
Well, I retract whatever I said.
All right, members, it is now 4:30. At this time, we will break for tea and we'll resume at 5 p.m. Where, well, I see member for Caroni Central. All right, so again, on the opposition side.
150 years.